call be lifted.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I come to the floor this afternoon to oppose the amendment that has been offered by the senator from Oklahoma that would undo decades of policy on how we treat veterans who are suffering from diseases associated with Agent Orange exposure. And that violates the promise we have made to a generation of veterans. Mr. President, the legacy of Agent Orange exposure among Vietnam veterans is one of tragedy, roadblocks, neglect, pain, and then more roadblocks. It's the legacy of our military spraying millions of gallons of poisonous herbicide indiscriminately, without any thought of consequences and without any repercussions. The time of the Vietnam War and for far too long after it, the U.S. government neglected to track Agent Orange exposures. Then, in the decades following the war, our government stonewalled veterans who developed horrible ailments of all kinds from those exposures. And to further compound the problem, for decades our government failed to fund any research on Agent Orange and any other toxins that Vietnam veterans were exposed to. Those mistakes, those decades of neglect have a cost. It's a cost to the veterans and their loved ones. It's a cost to the government that sent them to war. And it's a cost to all of us as Americans. And it's a cost that even in difficult budget times, even with our back against the wall, we can't walk away from it. Now, Mr. President, I'm not here to question any senator's commitment to our veterans. But what I am here to do is to question the standard by which this amendment says that they should be treated. This amendment that's been offered says we should change the standard by which we have judged Agent Orange cases for 2 decades. Currently, Vietnam veterans are presumed to be service-connected when the VA Secretary determines that a positive association exists between exposure to Agent Orange and a certain disease. One of the reasons that Congress chose that mechanism is because it was impossible for these veterans to prove their exposure to Agent Orange caused their cancers or other diseases. These veterans were exposed decades ago. They do not know where exactly they were exposed or how much they inhaled. However, under the senator from Oklahoma's amendment, Vietnam veterans would be asked to now prove the impossible. They'd be asked to prove that they would never have gotten cancer or heart disease or any other disease or condition, if not for Agent Orange. Vietnam veterans who have diabetes or prostate cancer or lung cancer or bloodborne diseases would be denied care and benefits under this amendment. And not only would this be a new hurdle Vietnam veterans could never overcome, it would change the rules midstream. It would literally treat Vietnam veterans whose diseases have already been presumptively service-connected different from those whose disease have not yet been positively associated with Agent Orange exposure. Now, Mr. President, I won't deny that compensation for exposures is a difficult issue and one that we continually have to look at. We've grappled with this issue in relation to Vietnam veterans and exposure to Agent Orange, and today we continue to deal with this issue as Iraq and Afghanistan veterans come home from illnesses potentially associated with their exposure to toxins released from burn pits or other environmental exposures. But ultimately, you have to look at the facts with reason and compassion and weigh the years of our military's failure to track these exposures, the inevitable existence of uncertainty, and the word of our veterans. And that's exactly what we have to do here. On the one hand, we have thousands of veterans who've come forward and believe that their cancers and ailments were caused by an exposure to a known killer. You have studies that show veterans that were exposed to Agent Orange are more likely to have heart disease or cancer or other conditions. You have the Institute of Medicine that has recommended giving veterans the benefit of the doubt. And you have the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, who has decided that we must move forward to provide compensation to presumptively service-connected veterans exposed to Agent Orange for cancer and heart diseases. On the other hand, you may have a compelling fiscal case, but the senator from Oklahoma hasn't presented one shred of evidence that Agent Orange does not cause heart disease or cancer or any other condition. What has been presented is an amendment that asks veterans to wait until there's more scientific evidence. Well, Mr. President, these veterans have been waiting for 40 years. How much longer should they wait? The Secretary of Veterans Affairs decided that the time for waiting was over. I ask that we respect and support his decision, and we remember that even in the midst of this whirlwind debt and deficit debate, we have made a promise to our veterans, one that doesn't go away. Mr. President, Vietnam veterans have paid enough for that war. They should not end up paying for our debt. It's us who owe them a debt. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Alabama is recognized.
I would ask unanimous consent that we be allowed to participate in a colloquy.
Without objection.
Mr. President, many of our good colleagues like to suggest our nation has historic deficits because the American people are not taxed enough. Some even claim the so-called Bush tax cuts are the culprit. But the numbers tell a different story. In fact, these tax cuts were fully implemented in 2003. Annual revenues have increased steadily from $1.782 trillion to $2.524 trillion in 2008. They increased every year, as an increase of more than 40%, and that's double the rate of inflation after the tax cuts took effect. In fact, since 2008, the recession and the weakest economic recovery in modern history, it's true that revenue has now declined. That makes sense. With high unemployment, there are fewer taxpayers, and naturally, revenue declines. Going forward, however, the Congressional Budget Office projects revenue as a share of the GDP, the economy, will rise to the 18.4 percentage point of GDP by 2021. And that's assuming the extension, not the elimination of the 2001-2003 tax reductions. Revenue is therefore projected to return to its historical 18.4% average. It would seem then that the American people are already taxed enough to finance a government whose spending has grown wildly out of control. The real problem is that while revenue will return to its historic average, if nothing is done to slow spending, annual outlays will increase from $3.7 trillion today to $5.7 trillion by 2021, an increase of more than 50%. As a share of GDP, outlays will remain, spending will remain on average above 23% of GDP. That's nearly 3 percentage points above the historical average.
Well, I could not agree more with your point on the real driver of our deficit and debt. We have this debt because government is spending too much. This is not a matter of personal preference. This is an indisputable and empirically verifiable fact. The systemic problem that this country faces is too much spending, not too little tax revenue. Now, I understand that our friends on the other side of the aisle are in a tough spot. They know this, but their left-wing base refuses any changes to the spending programs driving these deficits and debt. And they don't want to scare off middle-class Americans by recommending the tax increases necessary to close the gap without major changes to spending programs. So when it comes to offering up any real plans, this is what they've resorted to right here. They chose to ignore the real problem, and they hope that their friends in the media do the same thing, ignore the fact that they are ignoring the problem and sticking their heads in the sand. As you can see from this chart, that problem is spending.
Well, our friends on the other side of the aisle are almost exclusively focusing on hitting up the taxpayer for more revenue.
Well, that's right. They're talking about revenue, but the tax increases that they're recommending are more distracting than illuminating. I think it is fair to say that all of the talk by the President and his congressional allies about corporate jets and yachts is a classic red herring. Where is that? Well, on this chart, the name of this fallacy comes from the sport of fox hunting, in which a dried smoked herring, which is red in color, is dragged across the trail of the fox to show the hounds off the scent. Thus, a red herring argument is one which distracts the audience from the issue in question, though through the introduction of some irrelevancy.
Well, we use this all the time, but I'm afraid it's worth discussing how politicians use it.
Well, as you can see, that's what they're doing. I'm glad you bring this up. I did some research and found that the term red herring comes from the sport of fox hunting, as we mentioned here. And the red herring is one which distracts the audience from the issue in question through the introduction of some irrelevancy. And in my view, all of these tax issues that President Obama and those on the other side of the aisle are discussing are red herrings, meant to distract Americans from the real driver of our deficits and debt, and the real choices that Democrats have to but are refusing to make. Let me walk through some examples. If we were to raise the depreciable life on corporate jets from 5 years to 7 years, as the Democrats propose, it would yield $3.1 billion over 10 years. And how many I'll just say...
Oh, well, how many days of debt reduction over that 10-year period would a $3 billion savings or increase in taxes amount to, Senator Hatch?
Well, you know, to hear the President talk, you would think that this is the key to balancing our budget. And we all know that he's overstating the case, but it would provide at least a month of debt reduction. I think that's about all it would do. Now, given its essential role in his deficit reduction proposals, you would hope so, but I'm sorry to disappoint my friend from Alabama. According to our calculations, that amount equates to only 24 hours and 23 minutes of the debt over the next 10 years. So unfortunately, that doesn't even begin to solve the problem. And, of course, as you can see here, $13 trillion, the Obama debt, there'd be $3,100,000 over time for corporate jet taxes. And the remaining Obama debt, assuming that they didn't spend more, which is an assumption you can't make, would be $12,996,900,000,000 remaining Obama debt. Is the problem solved? Of course not.
Well, let me just say I appreciate the work of the ranking member of the Finance Committee and longtime member of that committee. So it seems to me pretty clearly that under the President's budget that he submitted earlier this year, which I have to say was voted down 97-0 in the United States Senate, his budget would have increased the deficit over 10 years by $13,000 billion, and he suggested that his plan to increase taxes on corporate jets by $3 billion would somehow make a difference in that. And I think, Senator Hatch, you're right that that's not accurate. How about other proposals we hear from the Democrats, Senator Hatch, cutting back mortgage interest deduction for yachts as used for second homes?
Well, in other words, by our calculations, the savings from this proposal would be even more meager. If Congress enacted this change, we could cover the debt from the Obama budget for all of 15 hours and 47 minutes. Again, this does not solve the problems of the burdensome debt the President is piling on.
Well, it is shocking to see how small those numbers are, and we aren't really hearing that in the press and the national discussions. For the talk we've heard about these proposals, you'd think they'd yield more than 2 days of debt reduction over 10 years.
Well, you would think so. But the other 3,651 days of debt under the 10-year Obama budget will not even be touched. There's a third red herring that has been thrown out there. Maybe that one closes the gap. We've all heard the President talk about hitting American oil companies by reducing or eliminating domestic energy incentives. Now, this is a real priority of his and of congressional Democrats. We had a cloture vote on a bill by our friend from New Jersey to extract $21 billion in revenue from U.S. oil companies. The Finance Committee had a hearing where the other side touted the benefits of this tax increase, by grilling the CEOs of the top 5 oil companies. If you listen to my friends on the other side, one would think that an additional $21 billion would solve all our fiscal problems. Their rhetoric suggests that this is the only thing standing between more money to send kids to college and provide school lunches. But I wonder if my friend from Alabama might put into perspective how much of the 10 years of debt in the President's budget this proposal would cover.
Well, with $13 trillion, that's 13,000 billion. $21 billion won't amount to much.
Well, here's how many days of the 10-year debt of the Obama budget would be covered. Keep in mind that this proposal originated from our friend from New Jersey, the head of the Senate Democratic campaign operation, and his tag teammate, the head of the Senate Democratic message operation, the so-called War Room, the senior senator from New York. I will let others decide whether this proposal was more political than substantive, but people should at least know the facts about this proposal before deciding. And as a deficit reduction proposal, this is very weak tea. This is a much ballyhooed proposal, and it would cover the deficit for actuality 5 days, 18 hours, and 47 minutes. Here's the oil rig proposal. We got a $13 trillion debt. Actually, it's about $13.5 trillion debt right now. You would save $21 billion on the oil and gas extra taxes. And even at that, we'd have a remaining debt of $12,978,900,000,000. Is the problem solved? Of course not.
Well, Senator Hatch, you've served on the Finance Committee for a number of years, and now the senior Republican, ranking Republican there. If you listen to our friends on the other side of the aisle, it would appear that all fiscal problems could be resolved by taxing millionaires. Is that something you're familiar with, that argument?
Well, I sure am. Anybody watching C-SPAN will see our friends on the other side making the argument day in and day out. When I hear this argument, I often think of a saying from a distinguished former chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, Senator Russell Long. When talking about tax reform, Senator Long said, some might reduce the politics to this: don't tax you, don't tax me, tax that fellow behind the tree. And since there are a lot more folks who aren't millionaires than are, the Democrats have calculated that the politics of class warfare works. All of our problems could be solved if the rich just paid their fair share, according to the Democrats. As politics, this might sound, I don't even think it sounds good, but as tax policy and as a proposal to reduce our deficits and debt, this is a fourth red herring. It does not come close to fixing the deficits from the Obama budget. Our friends on the other side frequently cite the Tax Policy Center, or TPC, for tax data. Now, that makes some sense. TPC is a professional think tank that is a joint venture of 2 center-left think tanks, the Urban Institute and the Brookings Institution. With the exception of its director, Donald Moran, TPC is largely staffed by highly qualified tax professionals who worked in Democratic Treasury departments and Democratic Hill offices. TPC is a solid professional outfit, but you can't ignore its institutional perspective. To be fair, I'd say the same thing about the Heritage Foundation. Their institutional perspective is more likely to line up with folks on my side of the aisle. Nonetheless, I'm drawing from TPC data some of the assumptions which I might not agree with. According to TPC models and estimates for 2011, American households earning more than $1 million account for 12% of the nation's pre-tax income. They pay 19% of federal taxes and carry an average tax rate of 29%. Now, even more critical from my perspective, these taxpayers also account for 38% of all flow-through income. Flow-through income is predominantly earnings from the ownership of small businesses, so raising rates on the rich will squarely hit those who create and expand the small businesses that need to be the engine of our economic recovery. But let's be clear about something. Higher taxes on these wealthy individuals will not only have adverse economic consequences, it will not even provide the deficit and debt reduction suggested by the left. Even if all the income, every dime that they earn of those earning more than $1 million were confiscated with a 100% rate, with the unlikely assumption of no taxpayer behavioral response. For the year of confiscation, these higher taxes would yield about $893 billion. Now, that would be a one-time confiscation. Surely none of these folks would continue to work, save, or invest in the future if the government were going to confiscate all their income. They'd have to cover all of their other expenses, including state and local taxes, from savings. And after taking everything from the folks behind the tree, in this case, the folks earning more than $1 million, how many days of the 10-year Obama budget debt would be eliminated?
Well, not many, the answer to that. But as often as the President talks about taxing the rich or spreading the wealth around as a cure for our fiscal problems, you would think it would balance the budget. But would it get us there?
Well, I say to my friend from Alabama, confiscating all the income from those earning over $1 million does not even fix 1 year of the 10 years of projected Obama debt. It would cover 244 days, 16 hours, and 34 minutes. That's it. Not even 1 year. And federal policy, just look at this, and federal policy makers could kiss that revenue source goodbye after an event like confiscation. So there you are, $13 trillion. Take the 893. If we took every dime that millionaires made this next year, the $893 billion, we'd be down to $12,107 billion remaining debt. Is the problem solved? Of course not.
Well, going back to the other chart on taxation and spending under the Obama budget, I would note that President Obama's budget raised taxes significantly, increased spending even more, and as a result, over 10 years, created more debt projected than if he'd made no budget at all.
Right.
Which is a stunning thing. But you can talk about raising taxes on the American workers, on families, on small businesses, on wealthy and investors all you want, but this talk is easy. It ignores the root causes of the deficit and debt problem here in Washington, out-of-control spending. It may sound cliche to the American people that Republicans are always talking about out-of-control spending. We wish it were a joke.
Yeah, I wish it was.
It's too sadly true.
I wish it was, too. I'm surprised about this debate. The press is not pushing Democrats on what a joke their proposals about jets and yachts are. But the American people, the people I represent in Utah, understand that these are red herrings. These proposals deal with the President's legacy of debt for less than 2 days over the next 10 years. Add in the much-publicized tax hit on the hated oil companies, you get another 5 days. So after all the demagoguery on jets and yachts and oil companies, you get about 1 week of deficit reduction. And even throwing in a one-time confiscation of all the income for taxpayers above $1 million, you can only add 244 days. Add it all up, and there is still less than 1 year. All those tax increases don't even get to 1/10 of the debt President Obama will add over the next 10 years. It's just class warfare, and we all know that. All the talk from the White House and from our friends on the other side is on behalf of proposals that would address, at best, less than 10% of the debt forced on American families by the President's budget. I asked my friend from Alabama if he might conclude with the classic definition of a red herring.
Well, let's take another look at the definition of red herring on your chart. It says, the name of this fallacy comes from the sport of fox hunting, in which a dried smoked herring, which is red in color, is dragged across the trail of the fox to throw the hounds off the scent. Thus, a red herring argument is one which distracts the audience from the issue in question through the introduction of some irrelevancy. Our friends on the other side, using White House talking points sophisticatedly prepared, appear to have resorted to red herrings with their deficit reduction proposals. They want the American people to think that a few easy tax increases on the rich, or yacht owners, or corporate jet users, or oil companies, the people behind the tree, can solve our debt crisis without spending reforms. They hope that these red herrings will hide a serious Democratic vulnerability. If they are not going to address spending in a serious way, massive tax increases on the middle class will be a necessity. These red herrings are designed to throw those citizens who care deeply about reducing the $13 trillion debt that President's budget will incur off the trail. The trail of deficit reduction leads to one of two places: restraining out-of-control spending or crushing tax relief increases on middle-class families. Restraining spending is not a red herring. It cuts to the heart of our fiscal problems. It goes to the root of the problem. The President and his allies need to come clean with the American people. The President so far has refused to present a deficit reduction plan. And these negotiations go on. He says he has one, but we never see it. So it can be scored and analyzed. The White House seems content to produce cheap talking points justifying these red herrings rather than meaningfully addressing our debt crisis. As I've said before and will again, this shows a disrespect, I think, for the American people. Our people deserve better. They need honest, fair analyses of the problems we face. I expect that they will reward those, however, who talk straight with them and offer serious grown-up efforts to address our debt with their support. And I think they'll be unhappy if once it's realized how little these proposals would impact the huge debt crisis we're now facing.
Well, I thank my colleague for his kind remarks. I have to say that not only would it not impact, but it would impact a lot of jobs. I remember when we did the so-called yacht tax back in the early 90s, the left just thought that was a wonderful thing. We'd get after all these rich yacht owners. And when they found out that thousands and thousands of jobs were lost because of that bill, they immediately turned tail and got rid of the bill pretty doggone quickly afterwards. And what we haven't said is we're assuming that $13 trillion is going to stay the same. Actually, in the next 10 years, there's a good chance it'll double to over $20 trillion, and possibly as high as $25 or $26 trillion, the way this administration is spending. And frankly, if we get there, we're going to have a very difficult time ever coming out of this hole that we're in right now. And all I can say is that, you know, I like the President personally, but, you know, he hasn't presented a program. He's calling on Congress to do it all, and we have our various problems here in getting together. But he hasn't led out on these programs, and neither have the other people down at the White House. In fact, one of the problems is I can't name one person at the White House who has ever created a private sector job. And, you know, let's face it, they're good at creating public sector jobs, but they're not very good at creating private sector jobs. And the real answer to our debt problems is to work our way out of them and to, instead of talking about shared sacrifice, let's talk about shared prosperity by allowing the engine of this economy, the small business community, to really pull us out. And even so, we haven't even talked about the fact that the deficit this year, just in 1 year, is $1.6 trillion, 1.5, $1.6 trillion. And I might add that we're going to have at least probably close to $1 trillion deficit every year under the President's own actuarial program, every year up through 2020. You can imagine how we're going to continue to increase the debt without doing anything about it. And frankly, that's if his actuaries are right, and they're usually always wrong on the low side. And that includes actuaries of both sides, to be honest with you. The expenses have always been more. And I think what's important here is that we get real about working together and coming up with a way of resolving these tremendous debt problems. The future of our young people in this country depend on that, and I just don't want to let them down. I want to thank my colleague for his colloquy with me, and I appreciate it very much. With that, suggest the absence of I yield the floor.
Senator from New Jersey is recognized.
Mr. President, I came to the floor. I heard an interesting colloquy going on between my colleagues, my friend from Utah and my friend from Alabama, and I saw that my name was invoked, so I thought I'd come to the floor and maybe elucidate for them and set the record a little bit straight. Number one is I am no longer the chairman of the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, so my focus in ending the tax breaks that the big 5 oil companies in this country get to the tune of $21 billion. $21 billion that the taxpayers of this country give, in essence, to the big 5 oil companies who will make $144 billion in profits this year. I just simply think don't need it in order to be able to achieve what the marketplace has allowed them to do. And I'm happy for them. I'm happy for all their stockholders and shareholders and everyone else. But they don't need $21 billion of the taxpayers' money in 2 breaks, which, by the way, they describe them as these poor oil companies that, wow, we're going to stop domestic production. One of the breaks that I want to finish, Mr. President, actually says you can't be doing what you're doing when you here in the United States, when you get access to the lands or waters of the United States to drill for oil and gas, you pay a royalty. Basically, a royalty is a license fee. Now, the oil companies figured out, well, when I do this in other countries in the world, instead of paying a license fee, let me ask them to pay a tax for the same amount that it would have cost to pay a license fee. Why? Because then I get the tax and I get to deduct it totally against my obligations here in the United States, which means that those poor oil companies that I just heard about, we are, in essence, as taxpayers, subsidizing the exploration of foreign oil, which goes on a world marketplace, doesn't come back to the United States, at the tune of $21 billion. Now, if we want to talk about poor, I want to talk about poor people who Republicans seem to want to go after their budget, the essence of the things they need to be able to get through every day. It's called Medicare for seniors and the disabled. I know it from my mother's own life, who worked in the factories of New Jersey, worked a lifetime to help build family and community, had a terrible disease and Alzheimer's, and she would not have lived with the dignity that she deserved in the twilight of her life but for what my sister and I were able to do for her, and Medicare as her baseline of retirement security. That's what I call poor. I call poor a young child who, through no fault of their own, under Medicaid is getting specific health care needs that they desperately need in order to have the quality of life to be even able to breathe, with respiratory ailments so that they can fulfill their God-given potential in school. That's about poor. But oil companies that are going to make $144 billion in profits, they're poor? Please, give me a break. And I know that we belittle the fact that, well, it's only $21 billion that we would put directly to deficit reduction. But, you know, if we start putting those $21 billion and then put the billions in ethanol subsidies, and then the horse racing industry and the corporate jets, and you start adding it all up, and maybe if instead of working class, middle class working families that we seem to want to put all the emphasis on by our Republican colleagues here in the Congress, we talked about the wealthiest people in the country and said to them, you know what, we really need you to help the country get out of this difficult time. They would be, I think, incredibly patriotic. I've talked to a lot of wealthy people who told me, you know, if it's to help the country and if we're going to get our house in order, I'm willing to help the country. I'm willing to pay a little bit more. But no, that's not possible to even talk about. Not possible to talk about big oil companies that are going to make record numbers of profits. Not possible to talk about ethanol. Not possible to talk about the wealthiest in the country, millionaires, multimillionaires, and billionaires. And yet, I didn't hear any of these voices when Ronald Reagan raised the debt ceiling 17 times for the equivalent of $4 trillion in today's monies. I never heard any of these voices say how irresponsible it was when George Bush raised it 7 times for $5 trillion, basically the same amount of money that he used to give tax cuts to the wealthiest people in the country, but for which became the collective debt of the United States. No, I didn't hear any of it then. So I had no intention, Mr. President, of coming to the floor, but when the facts are wrong and my name is invoked, I intend to come set the record straight. And I'm happy to debate my colleagues on this fact. We need to make sure that working class, middle class families in this country do not bear the overwhelming amount of the consequences of our effort to strive to end our deficits and meet our obligations. And we cannot continue to hear that poor oil companies, poor corporate jets, poor multimillionaires and billionaires can't close the loopholes in the tax code, all because that would somehow be a tax increase. But we can take right out of the pockets of middle-class and poor families by virtue of the services we deny them, that they will not have the money to be able to produce or scrounge with what little they have to be able to acquire, and say that that somehow is not a tax increase. I hear about entitlements all the time. Well, I got a new sense of what my Republican colleagues mean by entitlements. The oil companies are entitled to their $21 billion, and those are just 2 provisions, Mr. President. I could come up with a whole bunch of others that they get tax breaks for. The oil companies are entitled. The ethanol producers, they're entitled. The large agro-businesses in the country, they're entitled. But families who struggle every day to make ends meet, oh no, they're not entitled. We have to cut their entitlements. Nothing's wrong with that equation, Mr. President. A nation, at the end of the day, in its budget, talks about its values as a country. We all have a budget. We may not think about it as a budget in our personal lives, but it's income by however we derive it, through gainful employment, the job that we have, maybe some investments that we make, maybe some interest we get from our savings. That's our revenue. And then there's our expenditures. The house that we keep for our family, the insurance we provide for their health care, the education, the tuition we pay for the education we want them to achieve, the church or synagogue that we tithe to, the charitable contribution we make to an organization that we believe is worthy of the work that we do. That's an expression of our personal values. And the nation's budget, which is both revenues and expenditures, is an expression of our collective values as a country. And I just cannot understand, in that expression of collective values, how it is that the very wealthy, that the very influential, that big oil is entitled, but working-class families and the poorest among us are not entitled to be able to realize their hopes and dreams and aspirations in the greatest country on the face of the earth. Anyhow, I wanted to come, Mr. President, because I heard my name invoked. I think the facts were not quite up to par, and there is obviously a different view. Having had the opportunity, Mr. President, to set the record straight, I observe the absence of a quorum.
Mr. Akaka. Thank you. you.